Integrity. It's a foundational core value. Integrity is one of the substances that you build the foundation of your legacy on. Without integrity, whatever you build is eventually going to crumble, because everything that's not integrity in your life, in your speech, in the way that you talk, eventually is going to be exposed. And if you were to take, for an example, little pockets of air, little plastic bubbles, and pour them into your concrete foundation, eventually the weight of what you build will crush those little bubbles, and as those pockets of air are exposed, the concrete is going to crumble. And so it is with a life that has no integrity. Integrity is core to building your foundation, and that's what I want to talk about today. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. One of the things that I am really frustrated by is my own questionable integrity from time to time. Because there are things that I say and things that I do that they're reflexive. I know I'm the only one, though, because sometimes I respond to things without thinking through them. And I respond to things emotionally. I respond to things the way that just wants to come out of me. Just like this morning, I'm trying to load this podcast to get it started, and as I'm loading it, Siri's not playing nice. I copy, and when I try to paste, it doesn't want to paste. And when I try to put the description of the video into various social media formats, it doesn't want to do that. And I get frustrated, and I say things that are, well, they're not who I want to be, but apparently right now they're who I am. See, the challenge for real leaders is leaders have to reach the place in their life that they're willing to say, I've still got room to grow, but I'm holding on to the core value of integrity because I know that what I'm meant to be is true and solid. What that means really for many of us is that we've got to go back sometimes and apologize. We've got to go back and say, that's not what I meant to say, let me correct that. But I think really the only, let's say, misjudgment that we really have to hold ourselves accountable to is that willingness to speak, to do, to behave in a way that we know is dishonest. Now, if you've watched politicians or big corporate leaders for any period of time, you know this word called corruption. Corruption starts when we feel like maybe there's a gray area there. Maybe it would be okay if I did this and nobody really caught me on it. Maybe I'd get away with it. Or maybe I can find a way to say whether it's the way that I drive or the way that I pay my taxes or don't, or the way that I find the loopholes or I don't, or the way that I transact business with certain individuals or I don't. That those, some people might call it discrimination, but it's really just a gray area of the law. Some might call it discretion, but it's really just a gray area of the law. It usually starts there. But the reality is we find many business leaders, political leaders, who have this innate ability to find their gray points in the law, to find those lines where they can be crossed without a whole lot of accountability or recompense. There's no price to pay for crossing the line. I mean, perhaps you've noticed recently in the news that a Supreme Court order came down and said, for an example, on the moratorium offered by the CDC for landlords to not be able to collect rent or evict the people who are staying in their houses rent-free. And the Supreme Court came back and said, well, the CDC doesn't really have the authority to do that. So cease and desist with that and let the people who own the property either evict people or collect their rent, one or the other, because the CDC doesn't have the authority to tell them otherwise, and really, business-wise, it's not fair. But someone decided that forget what the Supreme Court said, I want to actually do this anyway, even though we know it's illegal, and literally said those words, we know that we're going to get shut down because we know that what we're doing is in violation, but we're going to do it anyway, and then began to seek out judges who would overturn the Supreme Court's ruling and allow the practice to continue even when they had been told it's illegal. That's not a slip of the tongue. That's not an emotional reaction to something. That is not a, wow, I didn't mean to say it like that, let me apologize. That is one example of hundreds, and I'm not picking on a particular individual or political policy. I'm using it as an example to say there are many instances where people will look you straight in the eye and tell you what they knew when they said it was not true. I think back to a media pundit years ago who spoke some things that they knew not to be true about a particular presidential candidate. Now, this has been years ago, almost a decade ago. And while that person was running for office, they said all kinds of things that slandered that person's name, destroyed their character. And the really sad thing is it was things that anybody who knew that candidate knew that's not true. That's just not in the realm of probability with that individual, given everything else that people know about them. And when the media pundit was called on the carpet later and said, well, did you know at the time that you said those things that they weren't true? The media pundit admitted, yeah, I knew they weren't true when I said them. But the SOB's not president now, is he? And so that media pundit made the point counter to exactly what I'm saying, and that is that media pundit lost their career. I'm sure they retired quite wealthy, but their career was over. They were done, and they sacrificed it on the altar of a political agenda. If you're a leader who can't decide whether or not the things that you say are important enough to stand the test of time, important enough to determine the future of your career or the end of your career. If you can't decide if what you're about to say, the action you're about to take, the business transaction you're about to engage in, the contract you're about to sign, if you can't decide whether or not those things are good for you and your posterity, for the legacy that you'll leave behind, for the people who will have to stand up under those decisions after you've made them, then you probably ought to question making them. And if as a leader you can't decide on your own whether or not those are good ideas or bad ideas, then it's probably time to step back and find some people who will hold you accountable and find some people who can give you some good advice so you can look at it and say, that's what I want to do. That's the end result that I'm looking for. Those are the final outcomes that I'm seeking. See, we've also seen in recent weeks, we've seen action taken that on one side, a lot of people, probably half of the world looked at it and went, that was a disaster. How could you possibly make those decisions with those priorities and in that order? What a mess has been created from that series of decisions. And yet the individual who made those decisions looked the world straight in the eye and said, that was exactly the outcome I was looking for. This was a splendid success. Now, how can both of those things be true? Well, if integrity is involved in your core values, then it can only be true if that was your original intent. Let that one settle in for a minute, because we all know people who've done things that we look at and go, why would you do that? And because we wouldn't do that, our judgment, our decision making, our process of thinking, what we hold dear, what we consider to be important, isn't the same as theirs. And when your priorities are different, when you make decisions based on different values and different outcomes, those decisions don't look like everybody else's decisions, because your desired outcome is different than their desired outcome. Integrity says, I know what I'm shooting for. I know where I'm going. I'm not going to lie to people about what my goals are, what my ambitions are, what my dreams are. I'm not going to lie to people about what my intentions are. And I think that's probably the biggest place that integrity reveals itself. When people can hear what you say, they can see what you do, and then measure that later against the intentions that you announced at the outset, that's when your integrity will reveal itself. If you say, I'm a family man, but you do things that better suit you than the rest of your family, that's not integrity. If you say that I'm a solid company man, but you do things that better suit you than the company, or that better suit another company than your company, then that's not integrity. If you were to say, I'm a loyal patriot, but the things that you do damage your nation rather than benefiting your nation, maybe they benefit your pocketbook or friends of yours, but not your nation, then that's a lack of integrity. Leaders who want to build a legacy that will last will build a legacy. And one of those core values that the substance of the foundation is built with is integrity. I want to challenge you as leaders today. Ask yourself as you make decisions, the declarations that you make, the things that you write down, the things that you put in your journal, the business plans that you write, the policies that you write for your company, for your team, the decisions that you make for your family. Are these decisions made with full integrity? Have I considered the outcome? Do these decisions line up with the intentions that I announced? Will people expect of me what I'm actually going to do? Or have I deceived them with the intentions that I've announced at the outset, knowing that I have no intention of following them as we go forward? I'm just trying to get my way by announcing the intentions that they want to hear. See, that's a lack of integrity. If you're a leader, take the time to ask yourself the questions. Am I operating in integrity? Am I telling the truth? Not just the truth that people want to hear, but what I know to be true, what I believe to be true, and the truth that guides me to make the decisions that I make. Am I speaking to people in a way that honors them and not just my own benefit? Am I making decisions that are not only good for me and my outcomes, but for the outcomes of those that I leave behind in the legacy of my leadership? If you'll take the time to ask yourself those questions today, you'll find a deeper core in your leadership. You'll find a stronger foundation in your leadership, and you'll find that the substance of that foundation is strong enough to build on. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, or Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day. Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom.